Hola, I'm Elias Torres, co-founder and CTO of Drift. You are listening to the American Dream podcast. Did you know that Drift is part of just 2% of VC-backed startups led by Latin American founders? Well, I'm on a mission to change that. On this show, you will hear from leaders who have achieved their own version of the American Dream. We'll talk about what the process looked like to get there, the obstacles they faced along the way, and the work we still have to do to build the new face of a diverse corporate America. Bienvenidos a todos. Today we have Cuco Vega on the podcast. Cuco is the co-founder and CTO of Vexi, a simple tool that helps small businesses create and launch landing page social campaign in minutes. Cuco has experience both in engineering and product design, and while he was born in the United States, Cuco spent most of his childhood in Mexico. Cuco, thanks for coming on the show.
No, thank you for having me, Elias. Pretty excited.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating. It's really a joy to meet fellow entrepreneurs and learning about their journey. And what I'm trying to do here on the podcast, on the American Dream podcast, is highlight other stories of Latinos, of underrepresented people and their journeys. And I think there's a lot of similarity between your journey and mine. And so I want to talk about that, right? I think the one short way of describing you is that you are an engineer working in big tech in the US that have made the big jump into become your own boss, become an entrepreneur, and start a company. Two major moments in there, right? One is achieving a job at a great tech company, and the other one is making the jump to entrepreneur. Let's talk about it. Was that easy? Was that overnight? Was it no problem? Tell me about that.
It was definitely not easy, to be honest, because before I made this jump into working for a big tech company, right? I pretty much spent 3 or 4 years just jumping between small gigs at agencies, working for startups, freelancing, at the same time going to grad school, because I was actually transitioning on my career from being an engineer, which was my first background, towards becoming a designer, which was my real passion, right? And it it was it was hard, but it not just because of the industry and how competitive it is and all that, but for me there was a lot of things that took me a little bit to understand culturally, especially, right? So just to give you an example, when I first moved back to the Bay Area after going to college in Mexico and working in Mexico for a little bit, the whole business culture is different over there. So I remember my first job interviews for a web designer role, and I would go to the interviews wearing a suit, because in Mexico, even if you're interviewing for a janitor position or whatever, you always have to be very well dressed for an interview, right? So now that I think about it, I'm like, these people probably look at me and just laugh hard about like, what's this guy doing here? So it took me a while to start getting a lot of things about how the culture here was a little different. But then I think that once I got it, I pretty quickly understood how to jump from gig to gig to focus on what I wanted to learn.
Right.
So yeah, that was pretty much how I did it.
Do you think that you should have just gone straight to Citrix? Is there a reason why you just couldn't go straight there?
Well, there's two things. To be honest, the first part, and this is probably something that a lot of people have, is I wasn't sure, or I didn't think I was ready to just apply for big companies. So on one side, I was doubtful of myself, and on the other side, I knew that even though I was a very creative person and I had a very good eye for design and all that, I knew that I wasn't ready, or I wasn't at least at the level where I wanted to be as a designer to now go to a big company and start this, right? But for me, there's also a bigger lesson of also how important community and networking is, because the main reason why I joined Citrix is because my now co-founder, which we met in 2008 at my first job in the Bay Area, we worked together and we stayed working together at different gigs, right? Like when I was freelancing. And then he's the one who tells me, hey, we're looking for a senior designer. Are you ready? And at that point, I was like, you know what? I feel like now I finally am ready. And that's how it pretty much happened, right? So I do think that there was a process, but it's also always very important, that networking part and that community, right? To help you take those steps.
I think that's a fantastic case study in this dilemma that the Latinos that we get stuck, right? That we feel, people talk about is the imposter syndrome. You don't think you're
Hmm.
good enough for a company like Citrix, right? Given the experience that you have now, that you worked at Citrix, when people that started at Citrix, were they any better or more experienced than you were at that same exact time in their careers?
No,
That,
I don't think so. I don't
right?
think so. Yeah, definitely. I don't think so. And you know what's really funny? I remember at my very first job, I was working at a biotech company, a Bio-Rad, and I remember the first week when I got there, and they would just I was just a contractor for like a 6-month contract because they were about to launch a new website. So they literally would just give me like a daily list of tasks, and I would just like tackle them like boom, boom, boom. And I remember it was like lunchtime and I was already done. And I would look around and I was like, wait, what are these people doing? What does it take for them to do this all day? And I have nothing to do now. And I would go to the manager and ask him for more work, which later, my now co-founder Rafa told me like, dude, you got to chill out a little bit. You're not doing that, not because it's bad, but people around are starting to get pissed because you make them look bad. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Like this is not even. So I don't know, dude. I think there's a lot of also cultural differences in that aspect. But no, when I joined Citrix, I didn't feel at all like I was less talented or less capable than any of my teammates.
No, hold on.
And
You did feel less when you were before you applied.
before, yes, because I didn't, but that's because I felt like I wasn't yet as good as I wanted to be, right?
Right,
And
right.
this
But,
is,
I'm saying, but that's the problem that holds us
yeah.
back from taking
Hmm.
chances, right? It's like
You're right.
this is the point that I'm trying to make for people listening
Yeah.
to this, right? Is
Yeah.
that here we were, you and I, feeling the same exact thing when I applied to IBM. My first job was IBM. And so you had to go through more steps and spend 3 to 4 years at agencies before you get a job at a big company because you
Hmm.
thought you were not ready. But the truth is that we're just the same, right?
Yeah.
And in fact,
Yeah.
your point is that we bring other things. You know, somebody that has been privileged and grew up here might not have the hustle that you had, that when you were given tasks, you're like, I'm going to crank through this because my parents told me that if I don't do this, I'm not going to survive and I have to work twice as hard. That's the
Yeah.
advantage of diversity, right? Different perspectives, different hustle, different values, different energy, different
Yeah.
personalities, right? That's what makes us different. And
Yeah.
so now that you've been there, you're like, hey, I was just as prepared to apply on the first day that I graduated, right? To do what I did. In fact, you were going to school to learn something else, so you were actually preparing yourself even better
Yeah.
for that first job there. So fantastic, fantastic. How was it working at Citrix? Was it tough being a Latino in Citrix?
It was I mean, honestly, I'm gonna sound like an asshole here, but it was great because my team was pretty much, this was 2011, but we were already remote. We had our base in San Francisco, offices in San Francisco, but we were pretty much working from home all day. So I would either work from my place or I would go to Rafa's place, my co-founder, and we would work from there, or we would go to a coffee shop or whatever. And to be honest, now that I think about it, it was an advantage, personal advantage, right? But at the same time, it was not. It didn't give us the opportunity to also connect wider with people in the company, because we were living in our own fantasy world where we do our job, whatever. We have our review calls and we present our work, and that's it. but I don't think it gave us the opportunity to grow or to connect with other departments outside of marketing communications, which is where we were, until later when things changed a little bit. New leadership came to the company. We actually had to go back and start going to the offices at least every now and then. And that's when I started meeting more people. And I actually got to see that there were also Latinos there, right? Which, I don't know. I just feel like I left an opportunity to grow and connect with other people, right? For with other from other departments and stuff. Um, but at the very end of that period, we did get involved pretty much with everyone from product engineering, marketing, and management. Right? And that's when I actually started looking at all the different opportunities, right? And that's when the idea for us to create our own business came.
That's amazing. And yeah, I was going to ask you, how many years did you do at Citrix, and how did you come up with that? By the way, I'm your business I'm very familiar with. I've built landing pages in, this is almost my fourth company doing that, right? So
Yeah.
very, very familiar with the space. Love it. How many years and how did you come up with the idea?
I was in Citrix for 3.5 years. And the idea came out, I think, from anger, from being really pissed at something that happened. We had been working for, I would say, about over a year, like a year and a half, on this huge project. So Citrix had just acquired a bunch of smaller companies that were building online products. One of those products was GoToMeeting, which back in the day was in the top three of video conferencing tools, right? And some other tools that were part of these other same companies, right? So the challenge for us was we had to put together all those different tools with completely different brands, messaging, functionality, product, everything, right? And for a year and a half, we worked together with every single other team, right? Product design, marketing, engineering. And we pretty much build everything under one suite, right? The online suite. So when we're about to present, then there's a leadership change. And like, most companies where when there's that kind of change, these people bring their own people. Or at least they want to make sure that they leave a stamp like, everyone needs to know that the moment I got here, I changed things and I improved stuff and. So these new guys tell us, oh, you know what? Yeah, what you did is, thanks for what you did, whatever, but we're going to bring an outside agency to actually take over. So we're like, take over what? Like we were ready to launch, right? So then they bring Frog Design, which is like a top agency worldwide, right? I mean, I do, and I had been an admirer, of course, of their work and everything. But they bring this team, and then this team looks at everything that we did, and then they just kind of message it a little bit, right, and change it a few things here, a few things there, and then the moment that was for us, like, that aha moment was in the final presentation when they're showing the campaign and all the different touch points and everything. And we literally saw some of the work that we did presented exactly the way we created it, exactly the same strategy, the same design, everything. So Rafa and I look at each other and we're like, dude, that's our work. Like we could be doing this thing and charging over $1 million like these guys, right? So that was a moment where we realized that the kind of work that we were doing and the experience that we had, that we were ready to start our own thing. Plus, to be honest, I always wanted to start my own business. I think that's just because growing up, that's how I saw my parents. And that's how I the reason why I also love, the name of your podcast is because I feel like every time that I talk about my experience, it's like I'm really this experience is really like the continuation of my parents' American dream, you know?
Yeah,
Um, and so for me, starting my own business had always been an ideal, right? And when we saw that opportunity, we were like, let's start. We're ready.
yeah. No, I think that There's a really great recollection, right, of how things happen, and I think that's something for people to hear here to pay attention because you were able to combine your work and your passion at a moment where you saw. I think that that's a really good technique, right? Is go look at your work that you do and see what's the gap between
Hmm.
you and the people that are making money from the same work. It's if it's an
Yeah.
agency, if it's a consultancy, if it's a software as a service product, if it is, whatever it is, right? Is to be able to see what others are doing with the same thing that you're doing, and that's the gap that we all have, right? It's like, oh, if I make it just slightly better, I can go from charging $100 to charging $1 million. And sometimes the difference is minimal, but it's the people that have the boldness, right, and the courage to go and ask for that. And so it's like
I
when you
agree.
saw that, right, you were like, I can do the same. So that was, I mean, that's exactly what happened to me at HubSpot, right? It's like at HubSpot, I saw Brian and Dharmesh, amazing founders, and they launched this company and it's worth $1 billion, right? And
Yeah.
we're like, wow, we did a whole bunch of the work here. And
Yeah.
they're the ones who, it's like, it's our work there. So exactly the same thing. And so David and I said, let's go. We're going to go start our own and we're going to make our own company go to $1 billion. And it's that drive, that chip on the shoulder of an immigrant that says, I see them doing it. They're just humans like me. And
Yeah.
I know how much I did here. I might be missing something. Well, let me go figure it out. Right. And and
Yeah.
and so is the right combination of experience, right? That you built
Yeah.
up in your agency days and the 3 years that you spent at SitGrid.
Exactly.
And so sometimes we got to do it early. We just got to find the right time that works for us, right? Where we have the right confidence. Oh,
Yeah.
unbelievable. I love it. Love it. And so then you go and you say, screw this, guys. We're going to go charge a lot. And did you get bootstrap? Did you get funding? Tell me a little about that other jump, big jump, right?
Yes.
Everybody right
So
now is wondering, like, how do I start my own company?
yeah. Yeah. For us, it was definitely at that moment, we both, both Rafa and I had a little bit of experience of working at startups, but working at a startup doesn't necessarily give you the knowledge to actually start yours, right? So when we first started, we started as a digital marketing agency. We were not even thinking about building a product or being a startup or raising money or anything. So what the first thing we did was, okay, we need to start getting clients. In order to get clients, we need to have some work to show, right? So we started doing some pro bono work while we were still at Citrix. So we started doing some pro bono work, and then once we had a good portfolio, we started reaching out to potential clients. Pretty much, we started looking at our Rolodex from companies that we worked at before and people that we worked with before, and that's how we started. We started telling our colleagues and people that we knew, and that's how we got our first clients, right? Once we the transition from having a full-time job to now being 100% on the business was kind of step by step, right? Like, for example, I was the first one to jump in 100% once we had enough work. So I was the first one to quit my job because I was, the single one with no kids and no mortgage. So I jumped in first. And then a few months later, Rafa also joined in. Um, and we ran for like a year and a half. We ran like a traditional agency until we saw the opportunity, right? The moment of truth, I think, was in a call with a potential client, and this guy was probably one of the hardest calls that we ever had. He did not become a client, but he pretty much left this little seed in our heads, right? That just started growing and growing. And what I remember is after we presented, our capabilities deck, and we show him this is what we've been doing, some success stories, and this is what we can do for you and everything. And then at the end, the guy's like, okay, so how do I know that's gonna be effective? How do I know that your beautiful work is gonna work? Like, yeah, that looks great, but how do you measure ROI on what you do? Like, because I'm not gonna be spending money just to have a new website, a new brand, and campaigns and stuff if I don't know what am I gonna get. And both Ralph and I were like, I don't know. And it's interesting. I mean, it's interesting because it's still today a challenge for things like marketing and design and strategy to really put an ROI on it. And I'm sure you guys deal with it constantly, right? And that's what a lot of companies in our industry are still trying to figure out. And some of them try to do it with data, and some of them try to do it with AI, and some of them, but for us, that was like the first moment that we were like, shit, that's true. Like, how can we make this more effective? How can we connect this with results? How can we? So the first thing we thought was, okay, can we use technology to do that? Can we build something that can do that? And from there, then we started, just every single every single afternoon, we would just spend 2 or 3 hours just trying to figure out how we could build something that would solve that, right? And it went through different phases because before we started pivoting, the first idea for a product was, okay, we need to make a platform that allows the client to see exactly what we're creating for them, and then what's going to be the outcomes, and then what are the expected results, right?
Right.
Still not actual ROI, but something like that, right? And then as we started
There's
building it,
value
and
in
we as we yeah, I mean, it's kind of hard, right? And this is what we learned at the same time, that we were not gonna hit the nail on the head like right away.
but he never stopped you from trying, and that's the key, right? That people need to know that it takes time and iteration, and I love what you did,
Yes.
right? The customer was teaching you a ton, right? It's like you were listening to them, even if they were not going to become a customer, you can always learn from them. At
Yeah.
Drift we say, like, we got to put the customer at the center of everything that we do,
Yeah.
and you were doing that's yeah, I trust me, I'm in ROI discussions all the time, and
Yeah.
it's like, how does the customer believe? And we have a lot
Hmm.
of data at Drift, right? I have a friend of mine that I'm an investor in his company called Clavio, and it's an email nurturing campaign for Shopify for e-commerce, and he had done a really good job of showing ROI because he would send emails to people that abandoned their carts at a Shopify website.
Hmm.
And so he would send an email and he could track when they clicked on the email. And then he
Yeah.
knows that email address, how much did they buy later on. So he could tell you how much money was being purchased
Yeah.
from their emails that they sent automatically with no effort all the
Yeah.
time. Right. And so that is like, I was like, that's such a beautiful ROI, right?
Yes, and what I think about it, I mean, when I think about it, I think it's about not trying to figure the ROI of like the bigger picture. You can start with small things like that, right? What's the ROI on following up on someone who you were probably going to lose as a customer,
Exactly.
right? So starting from small, tiny things, right? And I think that was also one of our first lessons. Uh, our first prototype was this Frankenstein thing that tried to do so many things that it wasn't doing anything relevant,
Yeah.
right? It would try to do a bunch of stuff, but it wasn't really solving anything, right?
That's a fantastic entrepreneur lesson, right? It's like, focus on one thing, do one thing really well, right? I mean, you still have to do a whole bunch of crap. It just never ends. But
Yeah,
I've been there, right? And when I read your description, right, it was like, well done, right? I can see the maturity at the stage that you are as a startup to say, we do just create, landing page for social campaigns, not just landing pages, because landing pages for everything could be a lot. I ran into a company, by the way, give you some ideas, right? It's like, maybe you already thought of this. There's a company that's creating landing page for TikTok influencers, right?
mm,
And so it creates a page specifically for them to put on their link on their profiles, that has the links designed for them to charge, to sell to a shop, to sell items, to achieve something.
yeah,
So they even, there's always like, always you can start with the niche and then expand, and that lets
yeah,
you know if you have traction, if you have product market fit.
yeah. No, I agree 100%. just this morning, as I was doing a demo of a product with a potential user, we we jump into a little bump because this company does mortgages, and the way that most advertising platforms nowadays treat specific type of companies like mortgages and other financial services, real estate and stuff, doesn't allow them to do the same kind of targeting that other industries can do. And right after the call, I was thinking, why are there not already tools that are specific for super regulated industries? Because there's a lot of them, from biotech and life sciences to financial services to, I don't know, gambling. There's a lot of them, right? But
Yeah.
yeah, like you said, there's always, and I think little by little, it's gonna go from these big tech companies that were doing massive stuff to the companies that are solving very, very specific problems.
To wrap it up, I think there's something that I love what you said, right? Is that about the American dream and your parents, right? And
Yeah.
and that you're extending that. It's like, yeah, I've been talking about my American dream, but it's really my mother's too, right? And actually, in my case, it's my grandmother who came to the United States. She crossed
Oh
the
wow.
Rio Grande in '75, and because of her, my mother could come, and because my mother could come, I came.
Yeah.
And so we are living a dream that started with her, mi abuelita. And so tell me a little bit about your mission. So to close
Yeah.
up, and how it connects to your parents, right? And what they taught you.
Well, I think one of the things that I got from my parents was definitely, I like, for me it's always been like the bar that they left it, right? It's kind of high already from coming here super young, no papers, no language, nothing, right? And then work here, start their own business, move back to Mexico because they wanted, my siblings and I to grow with their culture and all that stuff. So for me, the bar was already high. And I've always, inside of my head, I always have this thing that tells me you have to do at least a little higher, right? If they already put you right here, if they already gave you an education and already, gave you all the tools, right? And I mean, being honest, right? And just recognizing privilege, like just the fact that I could come here, with papers and everything, it did give me a lot of advantages that most Latinos don't have here, right?
Yeah.
Like, and I do think that always makes me feel like I have to do more. Like I have to reach higher than what they built and what they have reached so far, right? So number one, that, right? Number two, for me, the moment that I moved back to the Bay Area, it was very clear to me that my life was always going to be split between Mexico and the US, right? I mean, before technically already was culturally, most of my family is actually in the US. But for me, the moment that we start our business, it was also like, this is a good opportunity for me to connect back to the place where I grew up, and the place where I started my career, right, which was Guadalajara. And it started at a very interesting point as well, because when I had been already here for about 8 years. So I was completely disconnected from what was happening over there in the startup community, that when I left, it was just non existent, right? And it was a huge surprise for me that now a lot of the people that I went to school with, or that I worked with, had startups or were working at startups. And I'm like, wait, there are startups here? What is happening? So it was a very,
Yeah.
very interesting, way to reconnect, right? And now that's pretty much how our business runs, right? We have an office in Guadalajara, we have another office in La Paz, in Baja Sur, and we have a team in the Bay Area, right? So I get to go back and forth, right, all the time between Mexico and the Bay, and it's great, and it's
That
great. It has worked for the business, and it has worked for me personally.
that's an amazing, and so one of those startups in Guadalajara is called Drift. You should check it out.
I
And-
know it wasn't. I know that. I know you guys. I know you guys just opened operations there. So how are you liking it?
Well, we just started remote. We have hired
several engineers and a leader, Cesar Soto from Rappi. He was a VP of engineering. So
Mm,
really excited, and we're trying to plan our first visit where we either they come here, a lot of them, or we go there like
yeah.
a good group of us. Really excited, and during my interviews there, I find and I enjoy talking to Mexican engineers, and they're like, I'm so psyched for them that they're able to work from there and stay with their family and their culture, and not have to come here, because it's rough being an immigrant here, right? It's rough being away
Yeah.
from everything, and so
Yeah.
I know the feeling, and I wish I could have done that with my country, but we'll see how this is. To me, opening Guadalajara is the beginning of me giving back. Thank you so much, Cuco. Is unbelievable. Thank you for the time and your story. It's very inspirational.
No, thank you. Thank you, Elias. And thanks everyone for listening.
Thanks for listening to the American Dream Podcast. Make sure to hit subscribe so you never miss when a new episode drops. If you like this episode, please leave a 6-star review wherever you listen to your podcast. And if you're interested in learning more about my American Dream mission, subscribe to my newsletter linked in the show notes.